talking with my family the other day about how amazing it is that the church is still alive and that God continues to work through the church to transform lives all over the world. Because for nearly 2,000 years, the church has faced so many obstacles from within the church and obstacles from outside of the church, obstacles which seemed to threaten its very existence. But Jesus promised a long time ago that He would build His church. And in the midst of persecution and conflicts and scandals and false teaching and divisions, Jesus has continued to patiently and sovereignly show Himself faithful to keep that promise. We see that same faithfulness to His promises in today's reading in Genesis 44 to 47. The Lord had promised that He would build His people through Jacob's family into a great nation, and that through them He would bless all the families of the world. But Jacob's family history was filled with conflict and deception and immorality and competition and lots of mistrust. And when today's reading begins, it doesn't look very likely that they'll ever be a great people, or that they'll even survive as a people at all. Joseph, remember, was the child that Jacob had blessed, the one who would carry on the covenant promises of God to the next generation. But his brothers were jealous of Joseph. They hated him, and so they sold him into slavery. And eventually, Joseph ends up in prison in Egypt. And even though the Lord eventually brought him out of prison and put him into a position of great power, he was still working for Pharaoh, far away from his people and far away from the promised land of Canaan. And his people were also in danger of starving to death when a famine hit the land of Canaan. And so at this point, God's covenant promises are not looking too good. So Jacob sends his sons to Egypt to buy grain when he heard that there was food available there. But they had no idea that the man that Pharaoh had put in charge of storing and selling grain was Pharaoh's new right-hand man, who happened to be their brother Joseph. So Joseph's there in a position of great power and authority, and when his brothers come to him looking for food, he's in a perfect position to take revenge on them for what they had done to him years ago. But the Lord had been at work in Joseph's heart for years. Whether he was a slave in Potiphar's house, a prisoner in Pharaoh's dungeon, or the second most powerful man in Pharaoh's palace, one thing we've seen in his story is that wherever he goes, it's clear to everyone around him that the Lord was with him. Joseph knows that God didn't put him there so that he would have power to do something to his brothers. He understood that God put him in this position so that he would have the ability to do something for his brothers. Well, he first tested his brothers a bit, accusing them of being spies, making them think that he's going to take their brother Benjamin and make him a slave. But eventually he couldn't take it any longer. Joseph breaks down and weeps, and he reveals to his brothers who he really is. And amazingly, he forgave his brothers. He says at the beginning of chapter 45, "Don't be angry with yourselves that you sold me into slavery. It wasn't you who planned this. It was God who sent me here so that I could save your lives. And God has made me ruler over all of Egypt so that I can bring you here and I can protect the whole family and I can provide everything that you'll need." To Jacob, everything for years must have seemed like it was just falling apart, but not to God. In the midst of all of it, when it seemed like his promises were going to fail, God was at work patiently and sovereignly all along, doing exactly what he had promised that he would do long ago. And in chapter 46, when Jacob's preparing his family to take them to Egypt, the Lord appears to him and repeats that old promise. He says, "I will make you a great nation." He had promised Jacob way back in chapter 28 that he would never leave him until he had accomplished everything that he had promised him. And now he's making sure as an old man that Jacob knows the promises of God are still good. But this wasn't just about Jacob's family and about Israel. Through the life of Joseph, God gives us a preview of what he would do for us many years later through the death of Jesus on the cross. Like Joseph, Jesus was betrayed by his own people. He was falsely accused. He was arrested. He was mocked. He was beaten. And unlike Joseph, they took it a step further with Jesus, and he was put to death like a common criminal. But Jesus makes it clear, like Joseph did, that those people didn't put him on the cross. He says, "Nobody takes my life from me. I lay it down willingly on my own initiative so that they can be saved." God had promised hundreds of years earlier through the prophets that He would send a Savior. And now through Jesus, He was keeping that promise. And He was doing that for you and for me, so that we could be saved, so that we could be part of His family, so that through us, all the families of the earth would be blessed by the life-transforming love and truth of the gospel of Jesus. And He promises that together, we will be His people, and He will be our God, and that one day He Himself will dwell among us forever. That's a promise. And when God makes a promise, He always keeps it.